Hi, welcome to Grammar Compass with Sir Victor. Let us master English language together. Kindly reach out to us via our social media handles on the screen.
In our previous lesson, we talked about the SV pattern. If you haven't watched that video, kindly do so. In this lesson, we are going to talk about objects and complements. What is an object? Let us read this sentence. The man slapped his son. In this sentence, clearly, we can say that the man is the subject. Slapped is the verb. What about his son? What is the role of his son in this sentence? In the sentence, the son is receiving a very hot slap. Therefore, since the son is suffering from the action word slapped, we will call it the object. Therefore, we can explain the object as the object is the element that suffers the action expressed by the verb. Let's have more examples. The student kicked the ball. What was kicked? What is suffering from the action kicked? The answer is your object. And what is your answer? The ball. Therefore, we have the student as our subject. The verb, which is kicked, is an action word. And who is suffering or what is suffering from the action? It is the ball. Therefore, the ball becomes our object. So the object always suffers from the action expressed by the verb. Let us have another example. Emmanuel purchased a new van. Emmanuel is our subject. Purchased is our verb. This is an action word. What was purchased? If you find out what was purchased, then that becomes your object. So in this sentence, what was purchased? It was a new van. Therefore, a new van becomes the object. We found him. We is our subject. Found is our verb. What do you think will be the role of him? Whom did we find? That person or that element will suffer from the action found, and it is him. Since it is suffering from the action, we will call it the object. That is the meaning of an object as a clause element. It suffers from the action expressed by the verb. This means that if there is no action word in the sentence, then we can't have any objects. For example, the man was a driver. In this sentence, is there an action word? No. Although there is a verb, but that verb is not an action word. Was is not an action word. Therefore, a driver cannot function as our object. All the men are sad. In this sentence, is there an action taking place? No. If there is no action word, then there cannot be an object. Princess became a nurse. Is there an action word? No. Since there is no action word, there can't be an object. This means that it will depend on the type of verb that we have in a sentence, which will determine whether the element after it is an object or it is not an object. Let us look at the conditions which we should take note of if we want to be able to identify objects in a sentence. The first condition is that the object must be a noun, a pronoun, a noun phrase, or a nominal clause. That is the first condition. And it must follow a transitive verb. If an element is functioning as an object, then it must follow a transitive verb. What are these transitive verbs? These transitive verbs are mostly action words, and they require nouns, pronouns, noun phrases, or nominal clauses to complete their sense. Some of these transitive verbs are eat. You will always eat something. Therefore, the thing that you will eat will be your object. Hurt. You will hurt something or someone. Therefore, the thing or the person that comes after hurt becomes your object. Other transitive verbs include say, know, punish, teach, cut, express, kill, push, pull, put, and many others. Therefore, if you find these action words in a sentence, it means that there is a noun, a pronoun, a noun phrase, or a nominal clause which is suffering from the action, and therefore that noun, pronoun, noun phrase or the nominal clause becomes the object of these verbs. For example, we saw. What did we see? Anything that comes after saw will be your object because saw is a transitive verb. We can say, we saw Kelvin. Kelvin is an object. A beautiful woman. We can say, we saw a beautiful woman. What did we see? A beautiful woman. Therefore, a beautiful woman becomes our object. Any noun phrase or a clause that comes after a transitive verb or verbs like this will function as an object. For example, we saw everyone. So we are subject, saw are verb, everyone are object. We saw him. Him is our object. We saw what you talked about. What you talked about is our object because that is the thing that we saw. We saw whom we complained about. Whom we complained about is our object because that is what we saw. We saw when we will have the test. Therefore, the whole of this clause, which is a WH clause, is functioning as the object because it suffers from the action expressed by the verb. In a nutshell, whenever a noun phrase or a clause comes after a transitive verb or an action word, that noun or clause will suffer from the action and it becomes an object. S for our subject, which is we, saw as our verb, and then our objects. When there is only one object in a sentence, then that verb is going to be called a monotransitive verb because it is a verb that requires only one noun, pronoun, noun phrase or a clause after it. The sentences that we are going to see here contain only one object. Therefore, the pattern is going to be SVO, subject, verb, and object. Let us have these examples. Let us look at the noun or the pronoun functioning as an object. Example 1. We like talking. What do we like? What noun is suffering from the action like? It is talking. Therefore, talking becomes our object because it is what we like. 2. They met us. Whom did they meet? Us. Therefore, the pronoun us is suffering from met. It becomes an object. Dan drives cars. Dan is our subject. Drives is our transitive verb. It is an action. What do we drive? Cars. Therefore, cars suffer from the action drives. It becomes our object. She sent him. Whom did she send? The answer is your object because him is suffering from the action sent. John bought pencils. What noun is suffering from the action? Bought. It is pencils. Therefore, pencils becomes your object. You said something. Said is a transitive verb. And what comes after it? Something. Therefore, what was said? Something. Something is receiving the action. Therefore, it becomes our object. So the whole of this is an SVO pattern. It contains one subject, a verb, which is an action word, and then a noun or a pronoun as objects. Let us look at noun phrases as objects. 1. We like a handsome tall man. Whom do we like? A handsome tall man. So in this sentence, a handsome tall man is suffering from the action like. It becomes an object. They met all the businessmen. Whom did they meet? Your answer becomes the object. All the businessmen. So all the businessmen is functioning as our object. Dan killed a poisonous black snake. What did Dan kill? A poisonous black snake. Therefore, a poisonous black snake is a noun phrase which is functioning as our object. She sent the boy who won the most competitive game. Whom did she send? That noun phrase will function as your object because the whole of this is suffering from the action that took place. You can replace this with a pronoun. You can say, she sent him. So the whole of this is functioning together as our object. John bought the house which he liked. What did John buy? The house which he liked. So the whole of this is functioning as the object because it receives the action. The next one, you said a beautiful Ghanaian name. What did you say? That thing or that object or something that you said will suffer from the action say. And what did you say? A beautiful Ghanaian name. The whole of this is serving as our object because it suffers from the action said. So our pattern would be SVO. Now let us continue to look at clauses that can function as objects. These are specifically for advanced English learners. Number 1, I know what she likes. What do I know? What she likes. Therefore, what she likes is suffering from the action know. It is a clause. Do you remember our lessons on clauses? If you haven't watched the introduction to the clause, kindly go and watch it. This is an interrogative clause and it is receiving the action. It is suffering from the action, so it becomes the object. He believes that he will win the race. What does he believe? Whatever you say will be your object because it will suffer from the action believe. So what does he believe? He believes that he will win the race. You can replace this with it. He believes it. Therefore, the whole of this is functioning as our object. The whole of this is functioning as our object and it is a that clause. Anne wondered why the train was late. What did Anne wonder? Whatever she wondered is our object and this is what she wondered. So the whole of this is serving as our object. Why the train was late. That is what Anne wondered. So why the train was late is suffering from the action wonder. So it becomes our object and it is a clause, a WH or an interrogative clause. I like to talk about him. What do I like? To talk about him. You can say, I like fufu. I like rice. Therefore, to talk about him is playing the same role as fufu and rice. So it is our object. They discussed what should be done. What did they discuss? What should be done. Therefore, what should be done is a clause which is suffering from the action discussed. It becomes our object. We forgot what the teacher said. What did we forget? What the teacher said. Therefore, what the teacher said becomes our object because it is a clause suffering from the action forget. So we have our SVO patterns, our subjects, our transitive or action words, and then our objects. The last one, they want to see their performance in the test. What do they want? Whatever comes here becomes the object. You can say they want a car, they want a house, they want bread, they want peace. So whatever they want would suffer from the action expressed by the verb. It is a desideration action. Therefore, to see their performance in a test is a clause, a to infinitive clause functioning as our object because it receives the action. She doesn't want to do her assignment. You can say she doesn't want a car, she doesn't want a house, she doesn't want a dog. So the function that a car, a dog, and a house will play will be the same function as what this to infinitive clause is playing. So to do her assignment is what she doesn't want. Therefore, it is receiving the action doesn't want. It becomes our object. So we have our SVO pattern. From what we've discussed, you can see that when we say an SVO pattern, we mean a subject, a verb, and only one object. What if we have two nouns or two noun phrases coming after the transitive verb? Would they be considered as one object? Let us have an example. My father bought Amma a car. Here, we can see that there is a transitive verb and we have two nouns that follow it. We have ama and a car. Both ama and a car come after a transitive verb, so we will consider both of them as objects. S, my father. V, but. O, ama. O, a car. However, the function of ama over here is slightly different from the car. In what sense? What was bought? It was a car. Therefore, a car is receiving the action directly. Any noun that receives the action directly is called the direct object. So whenever you have two nouns, the noun that suffers from the action directly will be the direct object. So in this sentence, a car is a direct object because it was the thing that was bought. What about ama, who is at the other end receiving the car? Ama is benefiting from the action that occurred. She will enjoy the car. Therefore, what will we call ama? We will call ama the indirect object. So the indirect object is always a beneficiary, the person that benefits from the action that occurred. The indirect object does not suffer from the action directly. However, it benefits from what occurred. Or you can say it is the noun that receives the direct object. In this sentence, what was bought? A car, direct object. And who would enjoy the car or who will receive the car? Ama, indirect object. The direct object suffers from the action directly, and the indirect object enjoys or benefits from the action. There is something you need to know about the indirect object. It is mostly a human being or something that is animate. We do not use inanimate objects as indirect objects. In our previous slide, we said that when there is only one noun after the verb, we call that transitive verb because it takes only one noun after it. What if there are two nouns after it, just as we have ama and a car? We will call it a ditransitive verb. So when there are two objects, the verb in the sentence is a ditransitive verb because it has taken two objects. Whenever we have two objects, one of them will be direct and one of them will be an indirect object. Therefore, our sentence pattern is going to be SVOO. Let us have these examples. We gave the teacher a letter. We is our subject. Gave is our verb and it is an action word. What did we give? A letter, direct object. And who is receiving or benefiting from the letter? The teacher, indirect object. They sent the man an expensive gift. They are subject. Sent are transitive verb. What was sent? It was an expensive gift. Therefore, this is our direct object. It receives the action directly. And who will benefit from what occurred? It is the man. The man becomes your indirect object because it will receive the direct object. It will benefit from the action that occurred. Steve prepared the guest some food. What was prepared? Some food. It directly receives the action or suffers from the action. Therefore, some food becomes our direct object, whilst the guest who would enjoy the food becomes our indirect object. So we still have SVOO pattern. He brought me a chair. Can you guess the pattern? SVOO. But which of them is the direct object and which of them is the indirect object? The direct object is a chair because that was what he brought. It suffers from the action directly. However, who is going to enjoy sitting on the chair? Therefore, me becomes our indirect object. So the four sentences have the pattern SVOO, subject, verb, object, and another object. So in labeling sentence elements, do not go and write indirect object. Indirect object is not a sentence element. Object is the sentence element. So whether it is a direct object or an indirect object, simply write O as an object because both, whether direct or indirect, are objects. Let us identify the direct and indirect objects in this particular image. We can see a man, a very rich man, holding a car key, and this means that he is buying his daughter a car. Now we can see the car in the background. What is the direct object? The man is our subject. What is the action that he is performing? He is buying. And what is he buying? The car. So the car suffers from the action buying directly. So it becomes a direct object. Now, what about the daughter? The daughter will be the one who will benefit or enjoy from the action that will occur. Therefore, the daughter becomes an indirect object. Now that we can distinguish the direct and indirect object, let us look at some situations where the indirect object becomes a prepositional phrase. So the condition is that the indirect object is equivalent to a prepositional phrase when it comes after the direct object. We can rewrite these sentences. For example, the rich man bought the boy a house. Who is benefiting from the action? The boy, our indirect object. And we have our direct object. If we rewrite this sentence, we will have the rich man bought a house for the boy. The rich man will still remain our subject. Bought will still remain our verb. A house was our direct object. It is the thing that suffers from the action, so it is our direct object. We will label it O as an object. What about for the boy? Here we can see that the boy who was enjoying this action has become part of a prepositional phrase. When this happens, the whole of the prepositional phrase becomes your object. So what will be the sentence pattern? The rich man will be your subject, bought your verb. A house, which is the direct object, will be an object. For the boy, which is the indirect object, will be labeled as object. Therefore, this sentence has been rewritten as this, and our object hasn't changed. We have our direct object coming before our indirect object, but in this we have our indirect object coming before our direct object. So when the order changes, then the indirect object will become a prepositional phrase and you will label it as your object. Another one, Emmanuel gave Paul a book. Can you rewrite this sentence? You can say Emmanuel gave a book to Paul. Therefore, Emmanuel becomes our subject, gave becomes our verb. What was given? A book, our object, and who received the book or who enjoyed? To Paul, our indirect object. Here, the indirect object is our prepositional phrase. In the third sentence, we wrote our father a letter. We, our subject, wrote our verb. Our father, indirect object, because he is the one going to benefit. And what did we write? A letter, our direct object. When the order changes, our father will become a prepositional phrase and we will label it as our object. We wrote a letter to our father. We, our subject, wrote verb, a letter, object, to our father, our indirect object. The last one, Uncle prepared the guest some food. Uncle prepared some food for our guests. Therefore, Uncle remains our subject, prepared our verb, some food our direct object, for our guests our indirect object. Now that we know the SVO and SVOO patterns, try to identify the sentence pattern in these sentences. The first one, the man gave his wife some advice. We met an old English teacher. She bought a book for his daughter. I want to have peace. The wise man in our village built a school for the community. The youngest child brought our visitor a desk. The students said that they don't care about the exam. You can pause the video and write down the sentence patterns. Let us see the answers. The first one is an SVOO pattern. The man our subject, gave our verb, his wife our indirect object, some advice our direct object. We met an old English teacher. We our subject, met our verb, and whom did we meet? An old English teacher our object. So we have an SVO pattern. She bought a book for his daughter. She, our subject, bought our verb. What was bought? A book, our direct object. And whom is receiving or benefiting from what action took place? For his daughter. So the prepositional phrase is our indirect object. Therefore, we have an SVOO pattern. I becomes your subject, want your verb, to have peace your object. What do I want? Whatever comes here becomes your object. For example, I want a car, I want a room, I want an apple. Therefore, to have peace is what we want. It is functioning as our object. The wise man in our village built a house for the community. The wise man in our village is our subject because he is the performer. Built is our verb and it is an action word. Therefore, the nouns or the clauses that comes after it will function as objects. So, the wise man built, what did he build? A house, direct object. And whom did he build the house for? Who is enjoying action that took place? For the community becomes our indirect object, SVOO. The last one, the youngest child brought our visitor a desk. The youngest child becomes our subject. He brought. What did he bring? A desk, our indirect object. A desk, our direct object. And our visitor becomes the indirect object. Here we have our subject, the students. Our verb, said. What did they say? Whatever you write is your object because it will suffer from the action say. Here we have a clause functioning as our object. This is what they said, so it is suffering directly from the action. We have an SVO pattern. This is what was said, that they are worried about the test. Congratulations to whatever marks that you got. If you got below 5, kindly take your time, go back and rewatch the video.